just don't see Fabio, but I hope he will join any moment. And I believe we can start now the session of this webinar, which is which is part of the Human Rights in the 21st Century project supported by the European Liberal Forum. I want to wish warm welcome to everybody who is watching us and invite you to be actively following this very important debate about COVID-19 and the global vaccine solidarity. It is a topic that has been on the very top of the agenda of every single country in the world. There has been no nation that has not been affected by the COVID-19. There has been no nation that has not suffered from tragic losses of human lives. And there has been no nation in the world that has not tried to get to the very bottom of the vaccination process as soon as possible in order to protect its own population. We are going to discuss and debate this today in this forum that is brought to you thanks to the European Liberal Forum as part of this project. And without further ado, I would like to invite Marco Mariani from the board of the European Liberal Forum to express his welcome. Marco, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon and welcome to this roundtable promoted by the European Liberal Forum with the support of Institute Novum. First of all, thank you for taking time out and being here today. My name is Marco Mariani and I'm a member of the board of the European Liberal Forum. For those who do not know us yet, we are the political foundation and think tank of the ALDE party. And we are working across Europe with more than 47 member organizations to test new ideas for a liberal future in a united Europe. As you know, today's webinar is dedicated to COVID and global vaccine solidarity. This is a very, let me say that I'm Italian, let me say this is today a very crucial issue. In fact, Italy's workers, both in the private and public sector, will need to have a green pass from tomorrow, exactly tomorrow, after the government decided to extend the scope of the vaccine passport to all workplaces. Employees who do not have the green pass face being suspended without pay from day one, and fines for failing to comply with the obligation go up to 1,500 euros. However, employers will not be allowed to fire workers for not having the green pass. The obligation will remain in force until the end of this year at least. And so people will be able to get COVID tests in pharmacies at a reduced price. And as you may know, the green certificate shows that someone is vaccinated for the coronavirus, or has recovered from it, or has recently tested negative. My personal opinion, my very personal opinion, is in favor of that instrument. I understand that this tool is very controversial from a political, moral, social, economic, and even legal point of view, because it faces issues about mainly constitutional law, administrative law, and labor law. So really, I have to congratulate with the Institute Novum to support this event, and with my friend Sebastian Pickel. And I pass the floor back to him. Thank you again, and enjoy the event.
Thank you very much, Marco. Grazie, Marco, for this warm welcome and for the given opportunity by the European Liberal Forum to run this event. And as you have said, there would not have been an event like today if this project, Human Rights in the 21st Century, was not initiated by the Institute Novum from Slovenia. The guilty person behind this project is Sebastian Pickel, the managing director of the Institute, and I would like to invite him to wish welcome to this online event. Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emil. You are too kind, Emil. May I just, for the information, tell that, yes, the project is run by Novum, but the topic and the participants would be not been here without Emil. So as much as to me, Emil, congratulations as well for what we are doing. As I'm a managing director of the Institute who runs the project, I will I will say a few words on the project itself and how it is functioning in this period of running last 2 years. This project, Human Rights in 21st Century, is jointly run by European Liberal Forum and Novum and several other political foundations across Europe. And we are actually searching for answers what human rights mean in this global world. What is going on now when the globalization is on its peak, when different types of problems are arising and so on. So actually human rights are not just a cornerstone and one of the pillars of European integration, but they are actually the world's most, probably most important, one of the most important values. I would actually even say that it's democratic heritage. Just for the information, world is celebrating 73rd anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights this year, and parallel to this also a 68th anniversary of the European Convention on Human Rights. And both documents are today being challenged by a changing political landscape, I would say, by the rise of populist systems, and also complex issues deriving out of technological changes, geostrategic interest, climate change, and last but actually not least, and the topic for today, health issues. And so what human rights mean in this global world? Until now, on the project, our focus was on previous roundtables was on human rights and rule of law, on the human rights and senior citizens, artificial intelligence, women's rights. But today's topic, COVID and global vaccine solidarity, is, as I would say, as timely as possible. Actually, global pandemic opened up a number of issues connected to public health, global values, economic interests, and of course, individual stories of of people, which is at the end most important. So thank you all for being here, for coming, for participating in this event. I'm definitely going to listen closely and carefully what you have to say. And once again, thanks to Emil for his energy, as always, even from far away, it's present. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and thank you very much for reminding us how important this topic is in the world today. It is something that is just going to stay with us. This is not a topic that is going to disappear, because this crisis is something that, first of all, it's not over. Second, it will take time for us to recuperate and recover from it and understand how the world will operate in the future based on the lessons learned from this pandemic and from the engulfing crisis for the entire planet. As you have said, we have been very lucky, because at this event today, we have speakers from all corners of the world. As there has been earlier said, there is no nation that has been not touched. We have speakers from Africa, from Southeast Asia, from South America, from both Eastern and Western Europe, to bring in the different dimensions of this ongoing crisis and to understand, perhaps reach some kind of common conclusions, how to proceed with the treatment of the current crisis and how to avoid crisis in the future. Before I present you the panelists, I would like to say that we are particularly delighted that together with us is a person who is a world leader. She leads the World Organization of Liberal Parties, but her experience is extremely valuable for the debate today. She has been part of the academia with 2 doctorates. She has been part of the business world. She has experience with managing an important government portfolio like the climate change, which is the most pressing global crisis that the humanity will face, if we can say it's facing today. And she has been a world leader champion of the United Nations system for climate change. In February this year, it was her, Hakim El Hayte, together with the president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the Senator Rick Dimes of Belgium, who came up with a global call, a call on behalf of the liberals for a common global response to the vaccine crisis that was looming at that time. Today, we are 8 long months since that call. And it seems that the pandemic is not stopping to cause tragedy in many parts of the world, despite the vaccination attempts. There is a great disparity. So Hakim El Hayte, please be so kind to share with us your keynote view about the current crisis that the world is facing with the global vaccination process. Hakim El Hayte, the president of Liberal International, my dear friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. You are so generous as usual, Emil. Thank you for your kind words. And I would like also to thank and to welcome all of you, and especially to thank Marco from the European Liberal Forum for this opportunity, and to thank Sebastian from the Nobel Institute for this very interesting debate and webinar. I'm very happy to be part of this online debate on COVID-19 and global vaccine solidarity. Indeed, we need solidarity, and this is part of the human rights in the 21st century. And I want to congratulate you on the choice of the team, because everybody is speaking and dealing with COVID, but we are not acting yet adequately to defeat the pandemic. This episode of our common history will certainly mark our future and that of our children. Can you realize that never ever before humanity has experienced the same health crisis in the same time and with the same consequences on our social organization? You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was naive. I was naively thinking that this nightmare will be solved by multilateral organization, that multilateralism, international cooperation will save all of us, including the poorest countries and the most vulnerable. Because it was obvious for all of us liberals that no one of us will be safe until all of us are safe. But this very teeny virus has turned our lives upside down, put billions of people under house arrest, prevented more than 1 billion of children from going to school, and has not only eroded our health and our economies, but has also provided a glaring illustration of how unfair the world can be. While more than, I will say, I have the figures of end of August, while 50% of people in high-income countries had received at least one dose of vaccine by the end, those are the figures of United Nations by the end of August. More than 60% have received 2 doses. And wealthy countries are now providing booster shots to fully inoculate people to combat the super contagious Delta variant of the COVID. The figures in low-income countries are very low, less than 5%. We were talking about 2% by the end of August. And this inequality and inequity in the distribution of the access to the vaccine will likely prolong the global health crisis. So we will live years again with the COVID-19, even though we have discovered in a very short time the vaccine. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, liberals have been on the front line calling for fair, democratic and respectful of human rights measures to tackle the consequences and to defeat the pandemic. We first called for the strengthening of the World Health Organization and the creation of a pandemic management mechanism backed by a fund and expert committee. And this is what is happening in all the institutions of the United Nations. You have always the convention and you have the expert committee and you have the fund. This is not the case for WHO, and we made this call and we lobby for this measure. We reach out on the UN and the EU and the WTO calling for more solidarity and support for the most vulnerable, and especially for Africa, when our dead friend Hans van Balen was alive. We did work together to lobby and to be loud within the European Commission to have promises of support for the African country, and that was at the very, very beginning of the pandemic. But months were passing, deaths were increasing, borders were closed, and we were only hearing promises and pledges, and we still have very low figures in many countries around the world about people who are vaccinated. And we still hear that many countries around the world are not even able to buy the vaccine because there is no disponibility, there is no vaccine. Then by the end of the first year of the pandemic, we clearly realized that there are 2 main problems which make the access of the vaccine difficult, if not impossible. First, the word production. The word production was insufficient, and the stock produced was sold to wealthy countries upstream of production. And that was the case for United States, that was the case for some countries in Europe, etc. The second main or important problem was the monopoly of the production of the vaccine, the monopoly by very few companies and industries. And this has 2 main consequences. The first consequence is the cost. The cost of the vaccine is was and is still very high for the poorest nations. This cost is still very, very high. And the quantity which is produced is not enough to cover the world demand. So we are not producing as much as humanity needs to vaccine the 7 billion of people around the world. So this is what justifies our latest call. And I remember that Emil, that time that Emil was involved also with Hans van Baalen, we called to liberalize the vaccine patent to allow the developing countries to produce their vaccine on their own. And that was, in our opinion, I will not say the only alternative, but that time we were not speaking yet about the billion of doses which will be distributed. But that was, in our opinion, the most valuable solution to speed the access to the vaccine. Now, what is the situation? The situation now we all know. The World Health Organization, that was designed to provide fair access to the shots for every country through COVAX, has fallen short of its goals. By the end of August, the original aim of COVAX was to distribute at least 2 billion doses, 2/3 of them to lower-income nations. By the end of 2021, August 30, it has shipped just 11% of this goal, 11%. In June, leaders of the group of 7 nations upped their commitment so that in all they have promised to provide 2.3 billion shots to developing nations by next year. China and Russia were early to export vaccines as a tool of diplomacy, and in August, China pledges to dramatically expand export to 2 billion doses this year. So far, the actual contributions have been paltry. We still in Liberal International say that billions more doses are needed and stress that the speed of donations is as important as the quantity. We are hearing about the donations, but if you look at the distribution and the flow of distribution, it's still very low. We are still worried that the flow of supply to the neediest countries would be interrupted by the decision in high-income nations to offer the 3rd dose to people who are already vaccinated or to the younger children. And we are still calling to expand production of COVID shots, relocate rich countries' excess doses, and ensure vaccines are deployed more equitably in future pandemic. So I hope that we will not repeat our historical mistakes, and that we will understand finally that we can only solve global challenges with global answers. And as you said, Emily, in your narrative, I hope that governments whom decided the restrictions of our freedom and disrupted the basis of our democratic system, governments that have invested a huge money from public money in research and development, will also take the responsibility and decree that cooperation among companies during such world pandemic cannot just be a commercial goal, but a public safety must. And I completely agree with you. I will not end on a nihilist note. I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of the scientists, expert researchers, doctors, whom were able in a very short time, in a very short period, to develop a vaccine, knowing that if you want to develop a vaccine, you need average of 2 years, and then you need to experience it, and it takes 4 to 5 years. We did it in less than 2 years, in 1 year. So I want really to congratulate them. And this proves something. This proves again that human ingenuity has no limit. And what we need now is to combine ingenuity to togetherness, to love. Ingenuity, togetherness, and love. Yes, we need love to have solidarity. We need to combine them to defeat this pandemic and to anticipate on future ones. Because personally, as ecologists, and with the challenges of climate change, if we are not acting on this register to defeat climate change and to to mitigate climate change, the COVID-19 will not be the latest pandemic. So I want to be positive. I hope that we will move, and thank you so much for this discussion, and thank you in advance for all the proposals you are going to do. I want also to add that since the beginning of the pandemic, Liberal International has released a newsletter informing all our members about the involvement of the pandemic, the vaccine, combating the fake news, etc. And we are and we will stay at the front line until defeating together this pandemic. Thank you, ELF. Thank you, Nobel Institute, for this kind invitation. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you very much, Hakima, for your insightful views and for your diligent work on this matter. I know that for you, this topic is extremely difficult and extremely emotional. Express yet again my condolences to you who have lost two of your closest ones to this pandemic. Yeah. And yet, despite that personal loss, despite the rage that you might have felt because of this global inequality and lack of solidarity, you keep up the positive tone, and you said that your view, you want to see the things in a positive way without the nihilist perception. You were very right to actually point out what are the two current problems and what are the two consequences. And I'll remind you, were already in February this year understanding where and in which direction we are moving if we were not to undertake action. So I hope that this debate that we're going to have now, it's going to spark a little bit more those who are taking decisions to understand that when the calls are made with good intentions, they should be understood and listened to, that there's no business as usual. And we understood it very, very well in all parts of the world. That's why we are so glad that today we have, as part of our panel, speakers who will bring in variety of thoughts and variety of opinions from different corners of the world. I'm delighted to present to you that among us, we have Musa Kua, a board member from the ASEAN Parliamentarians of Human Rights from Cambodia herself. She has been active in the political field, being Minister for Women Affairs. She was fighting for human rights. She's recognized and honored internationally for her human rights work and activism. So welcome, Sukua. Together with us, we also have Yasmina Mrsho, who was active very much in the local field in her native town of Sarajevo, in the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, a country that has suffered a lot from human tragedy 3 decades ago in the civil war, and now is suffering from yet another tragedy caused by COVID-19. Today, Yasmina is Deputy Secretary General of the Liberal Network in the southeast of Europe. Among us, we have a person who has championed political life for a long time as member of the federal parliament in Belgium, but also been active very much on a local level among his own citizens, being a mayor of his own municipality and now serving on the civil board. At the same time, with great international outreach and understanding, being president of EMA International. Jean-Jacques Flau, welcome to you too. And certainly, we have somebody who is going to bring up the perspective about a country that was so much spoken about during this crisis, that is Brazil. We have from Porto Alegre, a member of the state legislation of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, a person who is very known in his country for being a human rights and liberal thinker, philosopher, a doctor of sciences, and somebody who has started a number of important liberal initiatives in his own country. Fabio Osterman, welcome to you too. So without further ado, with this wonderful panel that we have together with us. I would like to start with Sokua. I mentioned you first. And I'm starting with you for one specific notion. We know that the pandemic emerged from China, at least that is the most accepted narrative about where the pandemic emerged from. And it seems that at the very beginning of the pandemic, your part of the world, Southeast Asia, was spared. But with the emergence of the new variants, in particular with the Delta variants, the situation turned very tragic. I mourn here the loss of a very good friend who might have been a perfect contributor to this panel, the late president of the Human Rights Commission of Philippines and our good colleague and friend, Chito Gascon, who lost his life only a few days ago due to COVID. So Sokua, please tell us, how is the situation today in Cambodia and in your country? What was the role of China in this entire situation with the pandemic, the aftermath, and the discussion that we have with the vaccines? Sokua, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for joining us again.
Thank you, Emil. Let me begin by thanking Hakima for her passion and for her call and for her hope for all of us. And also, let me begin by saying thank you to liberals in Europe for including Cambodia into this very important discussion. The title of my speech, of my presentation, is China COVID-19 Vaccine Diplomacy Works in Cambodia. But who pays the price? As Pablo started by saying, we are talking about human rights. We're talking about solidarity in defending ourselves and the global and the world against this pandemic. Let's start with China into Cambodia. Let me give you some specific data about Cambodia. Cambodia has a population of 16 million. As of today, Cambodia has 29.5 million doses. 26.8 million come from China. And how much of that is given to as gifts and how much is paid by Cambodia? It is very opaque. But before I go into China and the diplomacy of China in COVID by using COVID-19, let us start from the beginning. In early January 2020, very early on, when the world woke up to Wuhan, Mr. Hun Sen, the head of the Cambodia regime, said very clearly that coronavirus will not come to Cambodia until 31st of February. 31st of February. And just within a few days later, he flew himself to meet the president of China, to meet the foreign minister of China, and then came back with a different scenario. And because he went to China and his best friend, and he saw the opportunity to make a name and to build up, to strengthen his relationship with China. But from February 20 until the end of the 2020, Mr. Hun Sen went on from totally ignoring the coronavirus to putting a very strong law, the law on COVID-19. Can you show that slide, Emil? The law on COVID-19, the law on COVID-19 is as strong as allowing the regime to call for a state of emergency anytime. Not only that, to put anyone who is against the implementation of the law into prison for up to 20 years. As of today, at least one journalist is in prison for 5 years for opposing, for making critics about the vaccines. the Cambodian people were very, very concerned about the vaccine from China, because at that time, the vaccines from China were not yet recognized by WHO. In the meantime, Hun Sen was used the law, that is a draconian law, to lock down the whole city. The city of Phnom Penh has about 2 million. You can imagine 2 million people overnight locked down for more than a month. Workers who were working in the factories were locked down and had no more money, no more food whatsoever. And if people were complaining because they were starving, the police came to their homes right away and accusing them of spreading fake news or being part of members of the opposition, and then put into prison or re-educated, as in the style of the Khmer Rouge. And around February of 2021, there was a big, you see, the lockdown. It was overnight, and that it affected the small businesses people. That it affected the poorest of the poor, the urban poor who live in the city of Phnom Penh. No food, no medicine, no school, for no contacts whatsoever. Then it came down to the next slide, please. By February 2021, the Chinese vaccine arrived. Then there was Hun Sen started the vaccination campaign with a very ambitious target of 75% of the population, or 12 million of the population vaccinated. As of today, up to 70% of the Cambodian people have been fully vaccinated. And at least 80% have at least one shot. He is now getting into, during this whole campaign, he strengthened his relationship with China. He put his family companies, his cronies into the business of selling food to the people who were in lockdown. Can you imagine? The Ministry of Commerce were selling rice from the company that is owned by his son-in-law to the people, to workers, to the street, to those who are so poor, to buy rice from this company alone. There were no measures to help the small, tiny businesses, the family-based businesses, into helping them to cope with the crisis. Lockdown, and then he put his son, who is a 3-star general, into this campaign, and using the military, and for example, forcing people into 2 weeks quarantine, transforming the Olympic Stadium into a quarantine centers, meaning that people were forced. There was no way whatsoever to question anything, any approach or any policy of the regime of Hun Sen. And today, my friends, Cambodia is working toward a plan for a new normal by vaccinating children as young as 2 years old. But from a vaccine from China that is just barely recognized by WHO, but to vaccinate children as young as 2, there is no scientific proof that it is safe. And for the people to not be able to question, to not say a word about their fears, their concern about the health of their children, it is a total violation of human rights. It is a total violation of the freedom and the dignity and the safety of the people. So for the plan for a new normal, I will elaborate later, but our concern is the debts to China. Cambodia, 40% of Cambodia's debt is for China. On top of the debt for the vaccines, we don't know how Cambodia is going to pay China, but we know for sure a part of the strategic part, which is a coastal city of Cambodia, will be paid, will be used as a payment to China. That is going to be to affect the sovereignty and neutrality of Cambodia, and that is, we are not even talking about the reaction of the region, and we are still the people are still dealing with the economic effect, with the health effect, with the psychological effect of COVID-19. The situation in Cambodia is far from being over, although 80% of the people are fully vaccinated. 600,000 are now having the third dose, but China remains in Cambodia, and that is not what the Cambodian people want. We want to talk about global solidarity. We don't want to talk about monopoly from a country in the city by using their vaccines over the situation in Cambodia. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakua. Indeed, quite troublesome news from your part of the world, in particular from your country of origin, Cambodia, on how actually this COVID-19 pandemic has been used by the autocrats in order to not only to consolidate power, but to actually do a total power grab and to abuse the pandemic in order to enrich themselves and their families. This is absolutely mind-blowing, abusing health crisis in order to become richer, and going against all the human rights of the entire population, giving the country into the hands of one big neighbor, China. China has played also a huge role, even all the way to the southeast of Europe, to the Balkans, where Yasmina is now joining us from the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Sarajevo. China played a huge role in your neighboring country, Serbia, while the news from Bosnia is completely the opposite. It's news of huge tragedy. Bosnia is the second country in the world for deaths per capita, immediately following Peru. Macedonia immediately follows Bosnia as number 3, and the other countries in the southeast of Europe are among the top 10 countries by the COVID-19 fatalities. Of course, as I said earlier, Serbia is not part of that group. Yasmina, the situation in the country is quite tragic. What caused this COVID-19 produced tragedy, and what is the current situation with the vaccination?
Thank you, Emil, and hello to everyone from Sarajevo. Yes, it's a big tragedy. Being a war survivor as well, I have to tell you that this immensely reminds me of those times, because death has once again become a very normal occurrence in our country. And to be completely frank and completely honest, most of people don't even pay attention to the numbers anymore. And this reminded me of how in the 90s during the war, it was really normal for us to actually walk down the streets when there are no grenades and just see dead bodies. This time we are not seeing them, they are numbers, but we are also not paying attention to these dead bodies. Why is this like this? It's a very multi-layered problem. The thing with Bosnia is that it is a deeply decentralized country since the war ended. So we have 3 ethnic nationalist groups competing politically on this political arena. And we are a very decentralized country in terms of government. So we don't have a national health ministry. So the first problem that occurred for us, obviously, when the pandemic emerged and the first case emerged, we went into extreme lockdown, knowing that as a poor country with bad healthcare, we would not survive it. So the first wave actually missed us. And then the second wave hit, and we knew that we couldn't probably afford maybe one more lockdown as a poor country. But after that, no more lockdowns we could actually afford. And I mean, we knew that as people. So there was another lockdown after the first wave hit us and the second wave hit us. And then the vaccine production started to flow end of 2020 globally. So we thought, yeah, something is moving. And like Hakima said, you were naive to think that there will be more solidarity. But it was the first come, first serve. And yeah, we were waiting for the vaccines for a long time. I personally went to Serbia to get vaccinated because I couldn't do it in my country. We couldn't actually procure vaccines because we didn't have a health ministry. So this is one absurdity that was happening. It's the absurdity of the market. At one hand, we've had productions, we had companies competing on this market against each other, which is the most popular vaccine. We were seeing people in Europe making choices whether they do not want AstraZeneca or they want Pfizer. And we were reading this in the news and on Twitter and on social media. And on the other hand, so there was this competition, very open market. But on the other hand, you cannot sell those vaccines commercially. So it had to be national level governments negotiating for the procurement. And as a decentralized country, we could not do that. So our regional governments reached out to Pfizer, reached out to all the major production companies, and got ignored because if the prime minister of Canton Sarajevo, which is a regional government here who has its own health ministry and jurisdiction over public health, reaches out to Pfizer, they're like, who are you? And you are not the foreign minister or foreign trade minister of your country. Who are you? And it was very confusing to those companies who did not have to know all the constitutions of each country in the world. We couldn't, so we were largely dependent on the nations first. Actually, Bosnia bought its first vaccines this year in August, and they were the Sinopharm vaccines because the Chinese were the only ones who were willing to sell to us, to our regional health ministry in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this is one example of the absurdity that occurred. Another is our own personal political, domestic political issues, especially with healthcare corruption. So we've had also trouble with procuring oxygen. We've had trouble procuring ventilators. So we bought some Chinese defect ventilators. People were witnessing a high death rate in one institution that bought it. So this was a huge scandal. After it was discovered that the ventilators were bought by a country that usually trades in raspberries and not in medical equipment, because it was a fixed tender by the ruling party in the national level. So this was one corruption scandal that emerged. And another one that emerged in the other part of Bosnia, which is the Republika Srpska part, is the fact that the Transparency International office here discovered that because they didn't procure medical oxygen, they turned to industrial oxygen and they were giving it to patients. So there are like really scandalous information going on here. And also the procurement law. So we had a chance to change the procurement law on the national level right at the beginning when we saw we weren't buying any vaccines, we couldn't buy any vaccines. But it fell due to political tensions in the country. And the international community is very active in Bosnia. So they do most of the advocacy, most of the lobbying. And this was what really angered me at one point, that all the international community at that point were lobbying for constitutional and electoral changes because we had local elections coming up. And this was their interest, to change the electoral law. It's still their main interest to kind of fix these ethnic tensions. And they did not lobby for this procurement law to go through. The procurement law would just say, okay, in terms of global crisis, we don't have to follow the procedures that we usually follow. We can negotiate as a country, or the regions can negotiate as the country stays, because our current procurement law says that only we can buy medicine and vaccines via a drugstore or like a huge company that is registered. So it could commercial trade and not like national trade that is been done with the vaccines. So this was also one thing that contributed. And then we've had the vaccines finally coming in from the COVAX mechanism. Serbia opened its borders, did the vaccine diplomacy thing, offering the vaccines to Bosnia we could basically choose. So the open policy of Serbia was like this. You go to Serbia, across the border from Bosnia or any of the neighboring countries it was targeting at one point to all Europe. And you go there and they tell you, okay, we have Sputnik, we have Sinopharm, we have Pfizer, we have AstraZeneca. What do you want? And you choose your vaccine. It was surreal. While back on the other side of the border, you couldn't even buy those vaccines. So I saw a lot of Bosnians just buying the Pfizer vaccine, just not buying, but getting it, while Serbs who had really strong ties to Russia and China were mostly preferring that vaccine. So this was also the global, the geopolitical aspect of vaccination that we never thought it would be an issue, you know. And also the fact of data, and nobody talked about this, like how when Israel got its first doses and they became the country who negotiated that they would get the first Pfizer shots, it was openly discussed on how they gave access to the data that was emerging, the scientific data. And the example of Serbia, for example, is also something that is not discussed in terms of data trade. They are going to be having one of the most diverse databases of vaccination because they have information. Their Public Health Institute has information on all the comparative data on the Pfizer shot, on the AstraZeneca shot, on the Sputnik shot, and on the Sinopharm shot. How are we going to deal with this after this data trade? And just the open vaccine policy has even helped them have this valuable data set. And it's in a liberal authoritarian regime. So after all these scenarios, we finally got access to the vaccines. We finally got a lot of donations, procurements, and stuff like that. And then people were not going to get the shots. One of them we had mostly AstraZeneca in Bosnia, were refusing AstraZeneca. So Pfizer shots were just saved for priority groups or even some older generations and cancer survivors and stuff like that. But the AstraZeneca shot was widely available. And after being without vaccines for so long, people were not taking AstraZeneca. We were starting to throw or donate our own vaccines after being in a vaccine crisis. So this summer, because of the open market that was not so open, because we had production, the pharmacies and the vaccine producers competing on a market that was supposed to be based on solidarity, but it was actually a market race because one of the producers was affiliated with the huge pharmaceutical giant, which is Pfizer, and they actually turned to the marketing value of their own vaccine and turning it into an elite shot, and they did the branding. So everybody wanted to get Pfizer. And this was done, and people were refusing AstraZeneca. And then we had the anti-vaccination movement to emerge. So right now, as of today, the official data for Bosnia's vaccination rate, I'm repeating what Emil said, it's this country with the second mortality rate in the world and the first in Europe. Our official data is 15.5% for fully vaccinated, for people above 18 years old. It's probably much higher because we didn't also align our data. For example, the people from Serbia who got vaccinated in Serbia, they didn't apply. They had people who got vaccinated in Serbia, they had to apply manually to our database, and people were just like, okay, you didn't give me the vaccines, I went to Serbia, I'm not giving you my data. So we don't even know the number of people who are vaccinated. We don't know the exact number. And the anti-vaccination movement is just really strong. The conspiracy theories in this part of Europe are dominating the narrative. And this is another absurdity, is the kind of the elitist approach of the scientific community and the political community towards this narrative. We cannot just look at these people and say, and those people who are listening to them and say, okay, these are people are stupid and just go into fights with them. I personally am also guilty of this, honestly. Sometimes I get really emotional when I see an anti-vaccination post. But we have to understand that on the other side of this narrative, we also have these people, but in the middle, we have people who are still undecided. They are not sure. And by always approaching this thing aggressively, we are not targeting this gray zone, and we are not going to shift them to our side to make them understand the importance of vaccination. This is something that is not done on a good manner, and also politicians are still underestimating the anti-vaccination movement, which is again stronger in developing countries, because the developing countries were not on the global interest. because, and that's the third absurdity, the developed countries were vaccinated. We knew we had to wait for America to get vaccinated. We have to wait for Western Europe to get our shots, you know, and some countries still haven't gotten their shots, you know, and now it's the same thing, you know. With the booster dose, we have people who have never received, don't have the chance to receive the first dose. But now we're talking about booster doses in developed countries. And this is how we are not going to beat the pandemic. And the lessons learned from my country would be, don't underestimate crazy narratives, so to say. Don't underestimate them. Treat them seriously. We've done it in the past politically. We've done it with Brexit. We've done it with the Trump campaign. We are doing it again. We are underestimating a strong narrative. We are dismissing it. We are not addressing it in a tactical matter. We are not pulling people to our side of the merit. We are not communicating the importance of immunization for global health. And another lesson to be learned, that don't underestimate the capability of people who've been victims of a tragedy to start ignoring that tragedy, because this is what is happening here. We don't have any measures. We have extreme number of cases, extreme number of deaths, but life is normal. That is how used we got to the death around us. And it's not the first time for us. So
thank you, Yasmina.
Yeah, this is really something that I wanted to stress out.
It's a completely different narrative from what we have heard about Cambodia, and country that is completely authoritarian as Cambodia, where the vaccines were basically used as a tool by China to impose itself, and people were not even asked about the opinions, and even 2 years old were vaccinated, to a complete opposite case of the dysfunctional state like Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the people were actually being left on their own to actually fight for their survival by crossing the border in the neighboring countries like Serbia and get the vaccines, all the way to the point of them don't believing in the global system of vaccines and vaccine production, so that the vaccine theory is quite strong. But if Cambodia and Bosnia and Herzegovina are the two opposites of a coin of a state that is captured or dysfunctional, the European Union itself was not seen in the eyes of the ordinary public in the world as a success story in the terms of the management of the pandemics, be it from the start of the pandemics or be it in the start of the vaccination process. Nonetheless, the European Union was one of the champions on global level in research and development and coming up with the vaccines. So there has been mixed narrative and mixed news from Europe, from the European Union in particular, and from Belgium, a country that was hitting the headlines at the very beginning of the pandemics. Jean-Jacques, you were there. The Liberals in the government, you're quite involved in everything that is happening on local, on national level. The production of the vaccines are not far away from you. Some of them, of the large facilities, are in the Netherlands or in Germany or across the channel in the United Kingdom. How is the situation in Belgium and the European Union now?
Yes, thank you, Emil, and thank you for this organization. You heard me? It's okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. I'm a politician, but I'm also historian. And then I think it's very important to have a look from Venus about this COVID. I think it's a parallel between COVID in Europe and growth of communism in East Europe after the Second World War. Because when the COVID started in China, we have a lot of people in Belgium sick, but we are sure that it's only a little problem. But when that start in Italy after holidays in mountain, we think, oh, it's more important. And we are not prepared to have this pandemic. Then it's like the story of Europe. We start very bad, and after, and it's always the same with Europe. We start bad, and after we find solutions. And for COVID is the same. When 1 year and a half, we think that borders between European countries are closed. We have no products, no mask, no gel. You understand? We have no tests. We must import all from China, and we have concurrence between European countries to find test gel and mask. And progressive, we can do ourselves all these products. And the most important, and with this pandemic, we finally understand that we must absolutely now continue the desindustrialization of Europe. Since about 25 years, all industry goes to Asia and mainly to China. And now we have very dependent of China. And now, since 1 year, we start to initiate reflection and more reflection, action about that. It's very important. After we have the course about vaccine. You remember we have about 20 different vaccine in conception and after production, and we have chance in Europe to have a lot of laboratories for vaccine, and in Belgium also, because you know that the main seat of production of Pfizer is in Belgium, in north of Brussels. And but it's not only the production of vaccine. We've also in the start problems with production of the little bottles of vaccine, of syringe, of many things. But now we have the total solution for all this problem. But in Belgium, we start very bad, more bad than Europe, because we've you speak, Emil, that your country, Bosnia and Peru, are the three most important countries for dates. But in the start of problem, Belgium was also in the top of the problem. But now it's better, because first we have a good level of vaccination. About in Flanders, 90% of the population. In Wallonia, 80%. But in Flanders, in Brussels, and in Oost Belgium, is the part of Belgium when they speak German, it's only 60% of people. Why? Why this difference? we have a lot of explication. In Brussels, one is the problem of migrants, of people from North Africa origins. They have problem of acceptation of vaccination. In East Europe, in East Belgium, I don't know why, because it's new, this problem. It's a part of Belgium very rich, then it's not this problem. We have this problem in Brussels because people with no many money don't accept easy the vaccination, and the vaccination is gratis. It's no pay. And now we have no, it's good, but we have another problem now. It's the problem of COVID safe ticket, and it's not only in Belgium but also in other countries, and mainly in France, because now when you must go to a restaurant, to theater, to dancing, you must have this ticket, and to have this ticket, you must have do vaccination. Of you must have a test. Recent test, and a lot of people don't accept this kind of obligation. They think that we start with a society with two levels. I think it's a problem of rich countries, because in countries of Africa or also, they need a vaccine and then don't have. But a lot of people are oriented by complotists, have psychological and comment? Psychological problems with this vaccine. Then I think now that we must have a reflection in Europe, on West Europe, about we must do an obligation of now. We must accept to have a society with two different kinds of people, the vaccinated or tested and the others. I don't know what is the best solution, but the most important that I need to say is that we must absolutely prepare us to the next one, pandemic, because I'm sure that this COVID is not the last pandemic that we have in the future. Then the most important, and we have in Belgium and in Wallonia, in Parliament, we have a commission, special commission about this crisis of COVID, and the conclusion, and that we must prepare now for the other COVID, other pandemic problems in the future.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. Indeed, I mean, the lessons learned from different parts of the world are completely different. The crisis is the same. The challenges are similar, but the experiences are very different. Nonetheless, we'll have to learn some lessons from what is happening, and we'll discuss them later on. And perhaps when we're talking about different experiences, one of the most discussed countries in the world, perhaps because of its president and his position about COVID-19, was Brazil. We had the Brazilian federal president describing COVID-19 at the very beginning of the pandemic as a little flu, and had declined to follow what has been a world tendency of lockdowns. Instead of that, he had been organizing meetings with his own fellow supporters. Brazil was also dominating the news at the beginning of the year when I was there by the incredibly high amount of infections and deaths among the people. And nonetheless, Brazil managed quickly to basically find a way how to start vaccination of the process. And I was impressed to see how quickly in some parts of the country that vaccination process actually went on. So the news from world, Fabio, are the media reporting it very well? What is the situation on the ground? What was it and what is it today? And for us to hear you, we would need to have your microphone on. I can't hear you, but I'm not sure about the others. Nope.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. And this is why we do audio checks before the events. And even so, these things happen. Emil, great to be here. I'm glad to say that the worst is on the past, is behind now for Brazil. But what we had here was something that could be used for as a textbook case on how not to deal with a pandemic. Brazil had everything to be a successful case in terms of combating the pandemic. We have one of the largest networks of universal healthcare in the world, possibly the largest, since we're a country with 215 million people. Our famously inefficient SUS, but still is a universal healthcare system. We are, even though we are a developing country, we are currently a middle-income country. For you guys who know Brazil, know that in the past 20 years, we have evolved a lot in terms of leaving poverty behind, even though not so much as our friends in Southeast Asia. We are a country with a young population, and as the icing of the cake, we were the country in Latin America chosen by Pfizer to be their entrance as a test and as an example to the world as a country with a large vaccination campaign in November of last year. But as you mentioned, there was a big problem in the way, which was the presence of a president who just refused to believe that we were dealing with something serious. President Bolsonaro is nowadays, as far as I know, the only world leader who has not vaccinated himself, who has not taken vaccines. Not the first shot, not the second shot. He was recently through an embarrassing situation in New York in a meeting where he had to eat outdoors in a pizza place because he was not vaccinated. He was given a special license to be part of the meetings because he's the head of a state. And this is a very important example on how he dealt with the situation and how he did not lead the national efforts towards the challenge that was the pandemic in Brazil. We are currently on the news. We're still currently on the news for these sad news. Brazil is, in absolute terms, the second country in number of deaths, and in terms of in relative terms, among the largest countries we're the first place in number of deaths in relative terms, and this shows clearly that the situation was not very well dealt from the beginning. Now, I think due to the fact that the president realized that his electoral aspirations for next year would be very much hindered if he did not do anything to get the Brazilian people vaccinated. And now we are in a standpoint that allows us to see things more clear and to hope for a recovery from all this chaos that we have been living in Brazil. We had just recently reached the mark of 100 million Brazilians fully vaccinated. I am happily one of them. Even though I'm a politician, I did not have a special place in the line. I was just recently fully vaccinated 3 weeks ago. Very happy for this, very happy for my family, but very sad in face of the fact that 600,000 Brazilians did not have the chance to get to the vaccines and to live through the pandemics. So Brazil was a special case of how not to deal with the pandemics, on how not to cooperate internationally, be it with friendly nations in our continent and across the world, and how not to cooperate with companies that had the legitimate interest on profiting, providing vaccines for the people. In Brazil did not have the means to deal with that, because we had what you exposed in the beginning, a president who refuses to acknowledge the gravity of the pandemics and the necessity of vaccines. His position has been put in the lights here before public opinion and before the international community, and we've been working so we don't have to endure 4 more years of his irresponsibility as the president. But I think in the end, Brazilian society has proven itself to be stronger than the government, and the fact that we have 27 states that had to cooperate in the midst of all this confusion, and of the fact that we did not have a national leader as other countries had to focus the efforts to win this battle. As I said in the beginning, the worst is on the past. We left behind a tragedy of 600,000 deaths, lots of people who had the disease. Around 25 million people in Brazil were contaminated with COVID, and we're still not sure on what the repercussions and consequences of this will be. And now we will have to take care of the ill and of the people who were left behind. Lots of orphans, lots of people who lost people close to them, lots of human capital that was lost in this tragedy, and we will have to deal with this.
Yeah, you're right. The consequences will be dire, and it's much beyond what we have seen in the last 12 months. It's first of all, it's the tragedy for all the lives that were lost. You mentioned 600,000 Brazilians have lost their lives. Some responsibility has to be for that, but also the fact that that there will be long-term consequences of it. And speaking about these consequences, or what the UN Secretary General called only a few days ago, a moral outrage on international level with the way that the COVID pandemic was dealt with, or the way that the vaccination is going on in the developing countries, or the lack of the vaccination. There will be shifts in the global international affairs. Sukua, you have, of course, background from Cambodia, but you are also a board member of the ASEAN Parliamentarian of Human Rights. You spoke of the experience of Cambodia, which was very much dominated by China with large amount of vaccines. But next door in Myanmar, the junta was basically shooting at its people and killing it without providing them any medical support and any vaccines. The situation across Southeast Asia is different. You live in the United States, and you are aware of the political debates that are going both domestically, internationally, about how this entire COVID diplomacy is going to work out. What do you think will be the long-term consequences of this new reality in international relations?
Yeah, Emil, when we talk about solidarity, there is really no solidarity in terms of dealing with the COVID, and as countries are starting to open up, looking at the new normal life. And all that because of the pressure from companies, from the tourism sector, for example. Cambodia is the same. In Thailand, it's the same. In Europe, it's the same. It's not, again, looking at how to deal with this pandemic that hit the world, and how is the world going to come out of it. Meaning that, do tourists really need to go out at this moment? Or do we, as a tourist, I wouldn't go out. I would have to think about this, dealing with the urban poor of these big cities, the farmers in other parts of the world. How are they going to come out in the long run? Like, for example, in Thailand, next door, you talk about Myanmar, it's total atrocity. It's genocide, actually, to kill people who are already suffering from this terrible pandemic, and then to kill them just because they deserve those who are affected. For us in Cambodia, to label people as opposition because they dare speak out, because they think about, is my child safe by using the Chinese vaccine? That is something that needs to be put up on there is a World Summit, Democracy Summit. There are more summits coming up. I think this issue of dealing with the COVID-19 must be brought up as a lesson learned, and as the world moves forward to a new normal. There isn't such a new normal until the issue of this disparity of distribution of the vaccine is handled properly, without punishing the poor, and then for the recovery, the economic recovery, not to think just about for the sector that attracts those who can pay, which is tourism. But what about those who cannot pay, have to survive, like the women in the informal sector, the workers in these big factories that make these products for the big companies, who are still forced into these working conditions where there is no social distancing. It goes on and on. I think it is not just talking about to say solidarity about the vaccine alone is not enough. It has to be solidarity for the new life that it's about to begin.
Solidarity is the word that has been on the bus for the international relations for quite some time. And you started now in the response saying that there is no solidarity. One could say that there is only selfishness that we are witnessing, both on national and international level. Has the humanity reached that point where the selfishness is the one that the thing that dominates our lives and is guiding us to the future? Speaking of solidarity, even the European Union project as itself was based, or it is supposed to be based on solidarity. Solidarity between the countries, solidarity within the countries. European Union says often about this pandemic, rightly so, that no one is safe until we are all safe. Can European Union do something different than what it is doing today to elevate the problems with the vaccination in the developing world, in the countries where there is only 5 or under 5% of vaccination. Can this solidarity be seen in practice? Jean-Jacques, what do you think about it?
Yes, with, of course, the COVAX system, with a gift of, I think, 2 billion of vaccine, but gift of vaccine is not enough, because it's also a problem of logistique, of la chaîne du froid, comment? Cold chain, and to have medical doctors and infirmières to gift nurse to gift this vaccine, and also the administration, because when we give the first dose, after you must be sure that the people have the second, then it's a great organization that we can, and we have do in West Europa, but in many countries is a problem. You see now in Romania. In Romania, it's Europe too, but they have a big problem with hospital, with a lot of problems linked with COVID. And then the president of European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said a few days ago that we gave more and more vaccine to the Africa and so, but it's not enough. We must organize with all countries. It's important, and it's also important for us, important for European people, because when we go to holidays, we will not go to holidays in country where people are not vaccinated. When we do travel commerce with these countries, it's important that we are sure that it's not a problem for the future. Then it's a global problem, and we must absolutely be better with this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, in the European Union, you said, you identified rightly that there is a problem also not only of strategic planning, but also of how the entire process of administration of the decisions that are being taken are going to be dealt with. And perhaps those who are circled by the European Union, like the ones in the south of Europe, face that. You mentioned the problem of vaccination in Romania, but also it's, for example, the same in Bulgaria. At the end of the day, Bulgaria was handing out the doses of vaccines that were not used to some of the neighboring countries, but only too late, only 1 week before they expired, as it was in the case of Macedonia, and then they were trashed because there was no possibility to administer everything that was received within 1 week. Speaking of it, I mean, Yasmina, you are very much engaged in this international cooperation and in European integration, and nonetheless, you're coming from a country which has suffered a lot because the European Union was not well organized in order to offer the helping hand when it was needed. What is it that you think could have been done better? What would you have been doing if you were in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, or somewhere else? What kind of action you would have suggested?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's this is a problem of a long-term negligence towards the geopolitical aspect of Europe in the EU member states and their domestic politics. So it's not a focus of domestic politics. It's mostly now more focused on Brussels, but it's not like they are not thinking about the influence and through the vaccine diplomacy. So this was a they were late bloomers in that sense as well, the European Union. But what I would say that I would do maybe differently. I can understand at one point, because when we were reaching out, we were dependent highly on donations, but we had to wait for those donations because first we had to vaccinate the endangered categories in the member states. That's was the priority. So I understand that they want to protect their own citizens first, but this is also a global problem, and global problem requires solidarity and global solutions. And this is what we've lost, this sense of globalness, global solidarity, since the vaccination started. We had it during the pandemic. We were expecting it to happen when the vaccines start to roll out, but it stopped. It was, you save yourselves, you know, mostly. I would try to think about, it's not only just about healthcare. I would just start thinking about the virus not knowing borders. This is also a lot about promotion, about PR, about narrative. The entire vaccine is about that. The entire pandemic is now about that, even more than human lives. So talking about it in the European Union, talking about the problems of neighboring countries, and comparing them to the problems that they have. For example, in my country, there's a 15% vaccination rate, and hearing the percentages in Belgium and other countries, I'm shocked. So I kind of feel like, what can we do more as a country? But also at one point, they are always telling us, you need to handle things yourselves. And then when we wanted to do so, we set money aside, we couldn't procure those vaccines. So then again, at one point, they're telling us, you need to solve your own problems. Then when we try to, we can't do it, and we become dependent. So we need to figure out, Europe has to figure out its role in the region, in the neighborhood countries. Is it going to be strong influence, strong presence, strong sense of belongingness? And most obviously, think about health policy more. This is something that's been neglected in Europe because healthcare was not an issue that much in most parts of Europe. There's good healthcare, you know? It's not a political issue, but now we have to start thinking about it more, and we have to start thinking about the tools in the global healthcare, and we have to start thinking about the impact of it. So yeah, I think we need to start talking about EU and its role in this distribution, because everybody was expecting a lot from the EU, but the EU had its hands tied by the domestic policies of member states. So this was also another absurdity that occurred. I think we should start thinking mostly about how to give mechanisms to the European Union to consolidate European public health policy on the European level, which includes both the European Union and the member states, because it's really hard to contain it within the borders of single countries. It's a virus. It does not understand these things. It just mutates, migrates, and spreads. So this is one thing that I personally would focus from now on in terms of health policy in the European Union.
You're right to say there is this incoherence basically about this common regional instruments like the European Union. Is just one of them. I mean, we can also talk about ASEAN or other parts of the world, about how they actually fail to understand that there is more cooperation needed, be it in the health sector or be it in the terms of trade and supply chains, and in production of what is needed for the citizens on one hand, and on the other hand, the belief that we should close the borders, and if we close the borders, suddenly the problems are going to be solved, and the issues, like global issues, like the one that is regarding the health crisis, like the pandemic, is just going to disappear. We learned that by closing the borders, the problems actually do not disappear. They did not disappear in Brazil. They did not disappear in Belgium. They did not disappear in Bosnia. They did not disappear in Thailand, anywhere, except maybe in China. But I mean, who believes China these days about the facts and numbers that they are producing? And speaking about this role that different countries can play in terms of global action and understanding how we can basically find a better mechanism for quick action, Brazil comes to my mind. I mean, in terms of health reaction, Brazil became very famous over the last 2 decades in terms of large production of generic medicines. I remember we had these discussions in Brazil already 20 years ago. And in the meantime, Brazil became really global champion in the production of generic medicines. Yet, instead of benefiting out of that situation, Brazil did not live up to the opportunity of producing and providing vaccines, not to its own people, neither to the other continents. Of course, there is this question of intellectual property versus health and human rights. I mean, Hakima mentioned earlier that there was this liberal call on international level for lifting the intellectual properties for the vaccines that were actually developed with public funds. What do you think about this challenge, Fabio? Can Brazil do something more? Can Brazil play a more active role?
Well, Emil, currently Brazil, I think our main challenge should be dealing with our human capital challenges, so we can reestablish our health industry, so we can cooperate internationally. In terms of this trade-off you mentioned regarding intellectual property and the interest of people of acquiring medicines that could save lives, I don't see a great contradiction with our liberal principles. I think patents are a very controversial issue in the libertarian community, as we all know, and especially in the face of a huge pandemic like this. It's a subject that should be discussed with departing from a consequentialist point of view, because we're facing a worldwide tragedy. And I think Brazil, of course, due to its capacity of production, due to our well-developed industry of medicine, we could, of course, play an important part in this, especially now to our international counterparts, due to our currency crisis. Brazilian production has become more competitive in the international realm. So I think Brazil is able to contribute to this discussion with its economy and with its history of trustability in the international realm in what concerns to the discussion of patents.
It would be very good to bring Brazil back in the champion, so to say, position, as it could and can really play. And it would be very good actually to have more of reflection among everybody, and not just to leave it to the leaders of the countries. Some of them which are extremely damaging for their country, for the world in general, be it in Brazil.
Let me just add, Emil, we're undergoing a very important period in terms of democratic development and maturity here in the middle of this crisis. And I think in 1.5 years, 2 years, we'll be a much better country and a much more prepared country to deal with these challenges.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Brazil has demonstrated maturity nonetheless in its democratic governance, in its resilience, unlike other countries like Cambodia. And I see Sokua here on the screen, unfortunately nodding. She mentioned that we have to reflect based on the experiences now how to unite. I mean, one of the initiatives that she mentioned would be the Summit for Democracy that the US is launching in December this year. I think it's going to be the first out of 2 such summits. It is a great opportunity for us and sit down and honestly discuss. But when I say us, it doesn't mean only the leaders of the states. Somehow we are allowing the leaders of the states to represent the people without understanding that there is a large electorate over there who they do not represent. In some countries, I mean, the leadership, like in Brazil, does not enjoy more than 20% of popular support. What about these 80% of the public? How about more than 50% of the people of Cambodia who are robbed from their opportunity to express their opinions because the opposition is not allowed? We should bring everybody in debate. How do we use this crisis as an opportunity? Sokua, what do you think? How do we become more vocal?
Exactly. I think we have to be very careful not to just talk about the production of the vaccine, the distribution of the vaccine. Yes, it is very important. But at this point, we have to be talking about democracy and human rights. The voices of those who are most affected by this pandemic, who have lost everything. From some countries were more prepared with their economic package to deal with the crisis, but some countries, most of the countries, have no economic package for the pandemic COVID-19. For those who have to survive, have to start their lives again, do you think they have the power to speak up? Unless there is such a strong mechanism that, and the topic of human rights and dignity of the people on top of every single summit. And it's not up to the leaders to organize these summits. See, the world, the grassroots people can organize the summit. And we also want to talk about those who benefited so much, these big companies who benefited so much, who benefit again, still benefit from these online commerce. What is their contribution to the economic recovery? We have to be able to leave the people the right, that the dignity at the end of the day. And I'm like in Brazil, to realize that the people at the end of the day are the ones who make the choice. But how to organize so that they can make the choice, specifically for the case of Cambodia, it is about time, really time for the EU, for the allies of the democratic world to say to Hun Sen, your time is up. And election is really the moment to really talk about the conditions to aid, to assistance, and not leave the world, the space open again for China and to destroy democracy globally.
It is. I mean, it is about human rights from the very beginning of the pandemics. I mean, the ones who lost their lives were predominantly people who were disadvantaged,
right?
Like the elderly, or the people in the economical situation, or people who are coming from regions which are deprived and did not have good health protection. So it is about human rights, and this is something that we have to discuss, just as it is about the distribution and the availability of the vaccines. And as you said, that there are initiatives coming up. One of the initiatives that was recently launched, I have recently listened to, was the one that was raised by the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. And what they propose is a new COVID charter. Basically, just as the leaders after have met in the wake of the World War II to sit down and redefine the world order, perhaps it is a time to sit down and rediscuss now, because we cannot continue alienating each other further. We cannot continue building borders and barriers. We cannot build countries where we're going to isolate one from another and allow those who are abusers of human rights and anti-democrats to win. How do we move forward? Any ideas, Fabio? How does that look from the Brazilian perspective? How do we move forward in this global community? I know you said Brazil we have to wait for a year and a half, but when you are there in a year and a half, I guess you should be present and lead.
And how did Brazil organize for the next stage for democracy?
I think my connection is.
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. All right. I'm sorry. She asked something about our democracy.
Yeah. You say there's hope. What brought you together for this hope?
We are. What moves us currently is the hope that we will be having a new president beginning in 2023, and we'll be getting rid of the two populist menaces that threaten Brazilian democracy. In one side, our current president, Bolsonaro, and on the other side, our former president, Lula, who also brought very bad things for our democracy and our economy. I think that Brazil will undergo a very tough election period next year, but we'll survive, we'll overcome these difficulties, and we will be able to play a more responsible role in the international arena. And that includes, of course, the necessity of cooperating internationally with our historical partners. Brazil has always been a friendly country to all nations, to all communities. Brazil was one of the leading figures in the foundation of the United Nations. The first president of the United Nations was Brazilian. This is why the annual United Nations convention is usually inaugurated by Brazilian president, which this year also was a reason why we were embarrassed by the declarations of our president. But I think we'll survive this current crisis and show ourselves to be a more resilient country, as Emil mentioned. Emil knows Brazil very well and knows that this country has been through a lot and has increased the level of its democracy and the resilience of its people. So I'm optimistic about the role we will be able to play in the near future, and I hope to be a part of this directly, as my friends in the panel have been in their countries. I'm currently a state congressman. I will be part of the national project of my party for next year, and I hope I can have a positive impact in this process in the near future.
We wish for more people like you, Fabio, from Brazil. And actually, you're not part of the minority. You're part of the majority of Brazilians who think like this. And Yasmina, did you read these proposals from the Rockefeller Foundation or any other similar proposals? You're championing this global cooperation. How do these initiatives sound to you? What can we do?
Yeah, I think the proposal is definitely on point because right now, I don't think we are showing globally a picture of global solidarity and organization in tackling the pandemic. There's just a feeling of spontaneity and ad hoc dealing because a health crisis is usually something that was just dealt with the WHO or domestic ministries. So definitely,
Fabio mentioned United Nations. We lived an impression that there is disunited nations at the very moment.
Yeah, there's also, this was a crisis of trust in the United Nations at some point with the way the data was handled that was coming in the very early stages from China. So this is also part of the global health strategy. So we need to kind of reconsider the way we are dealing with global health right now and its impact and its relation to politics, which is something that we did not discuss in that case. So this is our current crisis. So I think these kind of initiatives would definitely bring more benefits, but also not just globally, but regionally, European level for us is very crucial in our region. And I think this is something that we need to overcome this domestic aspect of the COVID, but think of it globally, because this is the only way to end it. If we are just focusing on our countries, it's going to last because it will be present in other parts of the world, like some other diseases that we ignored because they were not close to us. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we need to kind of think globally about diseases more, and we need better campaigns. We need better health campaigns. I think WHO has great campaigns, but I don't think they are politically as strong as certain political campaigns. So yeah, politicians have to start thinking about health, global health strategies and public health strategies more in the political sense of campaigning, because we have narratives that are actually preventing the ending of this pandemic.
And in this very much term of what you're saying, reforming how we think, how we approach the issues, let's not forget that Europe or the European Union goes through an exercise, a year-long exercise, which is called Conference on the Future of Europe, where everything is being put on the table, both in the way that the European structures are being done, the way that European project is being developed, all the way to how Europe is going to act in the world. Jean-Jacques, can we expect that this conference on the future of Europe is going to tackle also this question of how we are going to reform not only Europe, but how we are going to reform the global relations so that it delivers better results to the people across the globe?
Yes, of course. This conference of the future of Europe must absolutely have reflection about the story of pandemic, this pandemic and the future. It's very important because we are on one and only world, and the future of all continents are important for Europe too. But we must also have analysis about this actual crisis, and must have reflection about the proposition of Rockefeller Foundation and about the conclusion of a special commission of different parliaments of the world, and we must absolutely do because in the past, when we have a kind of crisis, after a lot of months, we have other priorities, and here we know from now that we have absolutely other pandemic in the future, then it's a priority for me and for Europe.
Yeah, that's very important. I mean, when it is priority for you, and knowing that you have quite a lot of influence in the Belgian Parliament, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Development, that means quite a lot. So it calls us to be much more proactive and actually share ideas among ourselves. And speaking about ideas and speaking about sending a message of hope, because we have only a couple of minutes left for our excellent discussion today. If you were to end on a positive note, what would that be? Fabio, shall I start with you? So the reverse, on the reverse order. Yes, you send a message of hope. Brazil will be back as a strong global player, but what kind of positive note you would also say for the global vaccine solidarity topic that we are discussing today, and the global solidarity in general?
Well, Brazil has been undergoing very strong efforts to ensure the vaccination of our people in the recent months after a very terrible delay, and we are now producing vaccines. We have now technology to producing vaccines. I think Brazil can play a role in providing vaccines to our neighboring countries and to countries all around the world, depending on the stabilization of the situation here. Of course, we're currently in a situation where we have come from a peak of more than 3,000 deaths in a day in April to a situation now which still inspires a certain preoccupation. We're having around 500 deaths each day still, which means we're still far from the recovery, but I think we can already see a sunny day on the horizon.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it will be very important for this global mode to understand that it's not only the Europeans or India or North America and China that are going to produce the vaccines, but that there is decentralized production, not only for now, but for any other pandemic that is going to emerge. And exactly as some of the proposals from the COVID Charter and other papers that are circulating around, there should be more of a decentralized production of pharmaceutical products, including vaccines for challenges like this current pandemic. Jean-Jacques, what would be your positive note to end today? Because we have to send some good message of hope to everybody who is following.
We must think that more and more people now are convinced that the world is a village, and we have more and more solidarity between us. It's my conclusion.
Yeah, very, very good one. I mean, all the boundaries that are imposed among us are actually artificial boundaries, and protecting ourselves, meaning protecting everybody around us too. Thank you very much for that, Yasmina. Hopefully the situation in Bosnia will improve dramatically soon.
Yeah.
And what would be your message?
Yeah, we have elections next year, so hopefully liberals in the national government and improvement. As a war survivor, I remember the first years after war. And even though there was this recovery and this mental state, but there was also something I call survivor's drive. Mm-hmm. So when this is all over, I'm looking forward to this global survivor's drive and euphoria that can actually create amazing things. And these are the first year after that we are going to build our world in a direction. And what we do after that is going to change the direction that we're working in. So I'm really looking forward to that. And the only way to live that is to just enhance the vaccine solidarity and just end this pandemic once and for all, so we can see this euphoria emerging.
I never thought about it, but you're very, very right from the psychological point of view. I mean, we can see that the world is becoming dynamic. We just have to make sure that it goes in the right direction. So Kua, as the most experienced leader who has been quite visionary and honored by on so many levels for your activism and human rights work, what would be your message?
Throughout the almost 2 years of lockdown, the picture of the images and the sounds of the music of hope, especially, for example, in Spain, where people were playing music, were playing the violin from their balconies, how people got connected. That's human connection. That's a picture of hope that will last. I think through this pandemic, people have learned to look at themselves and to give themselves the value of their lives. But the real message of hope that I heard from a young human rights defender in Cambodia, I had a conversation with him. He took a lot of risk by having a conversation with me at midnight last night. He said, "Auntie, things will change. Nothing lasts forever. You think we don't, because we are not on the street, doesn't mean that we have given up. We are waiting for that moment of change, and it will happen." He gave me that message of hope last night.
Well, that's beautiful. I mean, at this very point, I can just express admiration for that young boy that talked to you, and for agreement with him. There is no better message than that one to conclude this discussion, that we will, in a euphoric way, wait and work, actually basically work, not wait. help those who are waiting, but we're going to work to make sure that we're going to deliver better policies, because as you said, we are in this global world as one big village. I thank you, all of you, for your participation, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your opinions, for dedicating 2 hours of your busy schedule to be with us today. And yet again, I thank the Novum Institute and the European Liberal Forum for providing us the platform to discuss this important topic today as part of the Human Rights in the 21st Century project. Please stay tuned on the social media of the project, both on YouTube and on Facebook, because some other interesting webinars are coming in the next 2-3 weeks. Thank you again very much, and I wish you good health and good rest of the morning or day, depend wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.